Hello there, welcome Jenny Smalls, my name is Boy Waldron and welcome to a nice little tutorial here. We're going to be looking at those pesky little seam lines that just don't seem to want to disappear. You might be feeling sanding, but you still seem to have a seam line gap. It's as if the filler's just coming out of that little micro seam line. A little bit of an example here, what we're going to be using here, which is a nice Spitfire by Eduard. You might be able to see, normally they're like tiny little sort of micro gaps. There's just a tiny one there and it doesn't seem to disappear. And actually, the step by step I'm working at the moment, I have noticed one of them. Right, hopefully you might be able to just see that in the light if I rotate it just right there. Just this tiny sort of little micro seam line gap that goes on there. There's a few reasons why these happen. I'm going to go through a few of them with you, starting off with this one here and how to sort of get rid of it. So if you've had the problem of, you've filled this tiny little gap there and you're just sanding, filling sanding, it just keeps on appearing. What's basically happening is the filler just isn't sticking. So when you sand it, it kind of rips it out. So because it's not sticking, we need to sort of do something about this little gap. So the first thing really you want to be thinking is the whole sticking process. Now obviously the sanding you've done has maybe sort of made that gap a bit smooth in there and it's not allowing it to do that, and normally they are small micro gaps, so it's like a very small area to fill in there. So although this might seem a bit sort of going backwards or the opposite, we want to make the gap bigger, right? So for this you can do lots of things. We can come in with a blade, right, and we can start scoring at it. You could even get out a pea cutter, right, and really sort of cut away a bit of that plastic, right? And I'll kind of do this just to start off with. So as you can see there's a bit of filler underneath there, but what I do find is quite good, because you got to think, the surfaces must be getting smooth so that the filler kind of just pops out. These little sanding, I don't know what they call them again, I forgot, but like these little sanding sort of pins, files or nails or whatever you want to call them, they're really cool. I really don't use these very often. We do have them in store, and when you do need them, they are really useful. So because we've got this really sort of nice sort of fine end to the sanding sort of needle here, right, what we can do is actually kind of get into this little micro seam line gap, right, and sand at it with a coarse one of these, right. So what we end up doing is getting rid of potentially all that smoothness that's been going on inside that gap, right, to make it rough, so as when we put a filler on now, we can actually get the filler to stick, and thus then we can go off and start sanding away, and we shouldn't end up pulling out the filler because we've made the gap bigger to get more filler in there, and we made it rough so that the filler sticks. Not going to bore you with that, but good old green putty, maybe finishing off with some Mr. Surfacer, and then you should be all good to go. Other causes for this is when we have things like filler. I mean, I think this is what may have happened with mine just here, with this sort of little micro gap there, is not leaving maybe your fillers to dry long enough, right? These kind of fillers, they may feel dry, you may be able to go off and sand them and stuff, but it doesn't mean that they've cured right down to the bone. If they haven't cured down to the bone, it means there is still going to be shrinking happening. So if you may rush ahead with your builds, maybe you fill in the morning, you're sanding away, it looks nice and seamless, you maybe go jumping straight into the spray stage. The spray stage is going to lock in the filler and make that curing time take longer, so you could literally come a week down the line, which is pretty much what has happened with mine here, and it shrinks that little bit and you've got this micro little gap on there. So another prevention is make sure you got your drying times just right. Another one which we're going to do on the underside here, I've got a nice sort of artificial gap that I've made just here, just to show you. And what we can go off and do is a nice super glue technique. Right, I do like super glue. Super glue has this advantage of, one, obviously it's very sticky, right? So we're not going to be sanding it out of that gap, right? Just getting a super glue applicator out here. This is a pretty good one. We put our super glue on some sort of scrap pot or whatever you've got lying around, right? You want to do the same process what I've just showed you, where you kind of make the gap bigger. As you can see, I've made this gap bigger. You come in with the sanding pin. Oh, I've got to find out what this is called, but you know, use one of these just to actually, you know, make the surface rough so that you know it's going to stick, you know it's going to stay in there. Using the applicator, we want to get this as precisely as we can, right? And we just literally run this super glue right into our gap, our seam line, right? So if you're ever having problems, I mean, super glue isn't the most sort of practical one to use, in all fairness, because you know it's a lot harder, a lot tougher, and you've got to come along and really sand at it and stuff. But the whole big advantage is that super glue cures a lot faster. It's a lot stronger. It's going to stick in there a lot more. So when you have sanded it down, right, it is going to you know, you're not going to have any of those problems of shrinkage. You're not going to have the problems of like ripping out the filler. You know, none of that's going to happen. I will recommend, you can go, I mean, I know you've got things like super glue activators where you speed up this time of making the super glue dry. Don't use them because they do seem to like create pockets of air, and it kind of reacts with it, and it can, as I say, leave these little pockets of air, and when you sand at it, you'll have all these little pockets of air in there. So just let it dry naturally, so it will dry nice and solid with no sort of funny business going on when you apply that stuff. Also, I will also note, you know, when you do have these little micro gaps, don't be tempted to go off and just keep on sanding until it completely disappears, because yes, I could sand at this, and I could sand at this, and I could sand at this until it's like completely and utterly disappeared. The only problem is I've probably removed plastic. We don't want to be, in scale modeling, removing loads of plastic to remove a seam line, because we're literally going to create a flat top. We're going to change the shape and the form of the model, right? Always best to fill. So don't feel like just sanding the hell out of it until it's completely disappeared. And apart from that, those things should hopefully help you be able to go off and go, okay, I've got a stubborn seam line here, you know, check your drying times, make the gap a bit bigger, make the gap a bit rougher, or you can go off and try the super glue technique, and hopefully you should get your model all nicely seamless all around, ready for spraying. But apart from that, hopefully you've enjoyed this quick little tutorial on seam lines. But as always, until next time, my name's Bob Waldron, this is Genesis Models, and I hope you've enjoyed.